Once upon a time, there was a teenager. This teenager owned a mobile phone, and on that phone was an application, an app. The teenager loved her app. She would spend hours looking at it. She would look at it whilst doing her homework. She would look at it whilst eating. She would look at it whilst watching TV. And she would look at it whilst listening to her parents tell her lots of wise things. And then one day the app disappeared from her phone. She was distraught. She looked in the fridge. She even looked under the flower pot. And then she found it. And she was very happy. This, of course, is a take on the parable of the lost coin from Luke chapter 15. In it, a woman searches for a lost coin which is of significant value to her. She finds the coin and rejoices. So what is so important to rejoice about? The parable is clearly about the kingdom of God and how this is of the greatest importance. The kingdom of God is not about an object or about some super being out of somewhere over there. It's not about bridging a gap between us and God, some sort of original sin. And there's a danger about thinking of practitioners of religion, i.e. Christians, as being beholders of deposits of truth, impervious to improvement. This can treat religion as an object of knowledge and can turn it into a kind of power game which has parallels with earthly politics. As if religion were like a nation state that must defend itself against the incursion of other religions. It can turn the idea of the kingdom of God into an expression of power. Also, again, if we separate the natural world from the divine world, as if nature were without grace until God decides to infuse nature with grace and so save it. This treats the kingdom of God as an object because it treats nature as an object separate from the divine. Most of us feel separation from the divine. But if we're treated as someone who needs to learn something or experience something, then we can be kept in a sort of infantile state and don't reach a mature understanding of God, i.e., that God is not an object. Things can get misleading too if we treat the revelation of God as some sort of peak experience, as if it's something exceptional that overwrites or overwhelms our sense of separation. Peak experience, of course, happens, but it can lead to the person seeking the next peak experience and can overwrite the fact that God is the very basis of all experience. Religions can make the mistake of treating God as an object because God is someone to pray to, as if we're advocating towards a deity who may or may not hear us. The pastoral imperative within the church, no doubt to help people, can imprison people. Priests offering to be alongside people in their suffering, reaching out to God to overcome something or be comforted. Here there's a danger that a subtle separation can open up when praying to God for something becomes the norm. Catherine of Genoa said she hated the notion of being for God, or something coming from God, or even the idea of being in God, because that subtly carries still this sense of separation. The divine is all in all, including herself and creation. Catherine wanted to say, God is the basis of her own subjectivity, her own existence. And when she knows herself to be alive, she knows of the divine life directly and without any sense of gap. It's not about relationship or subjectivity either. God is subjectivity itself. As we become more ourselves, so we realise that we are always one with the divine. The archetypes for this in Christianity are both Mary and Jesus, who are both able to say yes to whatever happens in life. The mystical traditions offer roots to shaping our appreciation of this basic truth. One of the best known approaches is the apophatic. It points to the difference between knowing about God and knowing God. God can be known, the mystical traditions insist. Knowing about God is different. It's a bit like the difference between knowing about music and playing music. The critic can write about the performance, but it's the players who know the music directly. It's not about cleverness or adeptness. Divine appreciation is the most basic and fundamental part of human life, because it is life itself. Qualities like mercy, generosity, virtues that we know and feel resonating within ourselves, lead to an awareness of this divine embrace. Conversely, it's about sometimes suffering or tragedy that leads to letting go. That lets in the divine. One hesitates to talk about these things because they can be terrible. Suffering is a real thing. It's wise to be wary. But people who experience tragedies know that there's more than the tragedy. This is part of the mystery of divine subjectivity. In the wisdom traditions, the greatest question to ask is, who am I? And to know that in the saying of I am, that the divine I am is known too. It's as simple as that. People know this not just by prayer, meditation and contemplation, but by personal reflection. They know it in encounters with nature. They know it in relationships. When they're doing their work, they know it in the arts. They know it in the sciences. What we need is life. We may need space to contemplate its inequalities, and that might require a stepping back from a religious context that focuses more on the externalities, or a stepping back from the wider secular world that's obsessed with proof, evidence, and success. But the minute we step back from that can be the minute we step back into the truth of life, and so can discover the divine presence. Listen to yourself. Religion can also be a tribal belonging. It builds community, but the risk is that it fixes knowledge of God again at a kind of objective level, a social level. It makes divine awareness a form of material result in this case, building social capital, not realizing that the unity is at the basic level. It's just a realization of what is already the case, not something that needs to be assembled by gathering congregations and keeping them coming to church, assuring that the bums on seats return every weekend.